like to welcome everybody to this first Ivan Roundtable workshop for NMR operations. We'll be talking about remote web-based submissions for experiments for VnmrJ and Topspin. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dave Rice at this time to get everything started.
Okay, great. Thank you, Eric. So I welcome everyone. This is our first meeting of the new format where we're going to start to try to address technical subjects. And we've given this format the name Roundtable Workshop, which I hope best describes it. Sort of a combination between a webinar and a open discussion. And so before getting started, I guess I'd like to introduce John Webb, who is in charge of all of this and sponsors all of this, and have him say a few words.
Thank you, Dave, and I want to thank everyone for joining in with us today. And in particular, many thanks to the Ivan Board of Directors and the committee members that are putting all these wonderful meetings together. And MR Resources and Q1 Americas are very happy to sponsor them. That being said, I would like to turn it over to Dan Iverson very briefly. Dan has a very exciting announcement for us, and I'd also ask to hold off on any questions just so we can keep to the meeting schedule. But Dan, do you want to tell us what's going on today?
As you may know, Agilent is shutting down spin sites, and we're happy to announce the formation of a new Ivan spin sites, which is hosted on Slack. I'm the site moderator, along with Krish, Bert Heise, and John Ryan. Members of the Agilent Tech Support Group have joined. I've been able to download about 4.5 gigabytes of content from Agilent, and after removing redundant or obsolete material, uploaded 3 gigabytes of this content to the new Ivan spin sites. We invite you to join the 69 others who are already members of this new Ivan spin sites community, and I'll send their link around in the chat message that can be used to join the new Ivan spin sites.
Dan, that is really great news, and my hat's off to you for keeping spin sites going. That's wonderful news indeed. I just wanted to ask Donald Bouchard of Q1 Americas to give a brief message, and we will start the meeting off directly after that. Once again, if you could withhold any questions for right now towards Don, they could be answered a little bit later on. Donald, what do you have for us?
Okay, thank you very much, John. I want to introduce everyone that get to know Q1. Q1 designs and manufactures complete spectrometers from 400 to 600 megahertz with features for routine use in the research laboratory. If you'd like to upgrade an older system without blowing your budget, Q1 can retrofit AS and UltraShield magnets with complete upgrades, including automation, for less than you think. Q1 offers NMR instruments with excellent performance at an unbeatable price. Experts know the key to performance is the probe, and Q1 offers smart tune and match probes made by Q1 Tech in Zurich, Switzerland. Q1 Tech has decades of experience and leads the market in innovation. Q1 Tech STM probes have a patented hybrid tuning mechanism, which means faster tuning for improved throughput and unmatched reliability. Q1 offers their 400 megahertz instruments with STM probes in 3 configurations: a 2-channel probe with fluorine tuning on the X and H channel for maximum flexibility, or fluorine detection can be isolated to the X or H channel to maximize hydrogen sensitivity or to maximize carbon and phosphorus sensitivity. Q1 Tech STM probes are also integrated into Topspin and VnmrJ for upgrades, for improved performance, for throughput, for existing installations. Want to know more? Our websites have additional info, and we're also happy to offer remote demonstrations with your samples. Please contact us by phone or email.
Thank you, Don. At this point, I'll turn things back to Dave Rice, and he'll get things started off for us.
Okay, great. Thanks, Don and Dan. Both of those topics can be open for discussion later as we get towards the open discussion part of this roundtable workshop. So I'd like to thank our enthusiastic panel. Robin and Ken are the leaders, and they've put together a really good presentation here on our subject of web submission. And I'd like to mention a couple things about format as we go forward. The idea of a roundtable workshop is that we'll spend about the first half, or maybe a little more, of the nominal hour basically with presentations. And there'll be 3 presentations from Ken, Robin, and Hilary, and with discussion from the panel. And during that period, the chat will be open, and feel free to put your questions into the chat. And also I would ask you, and Eric will be working on it, to stay muted during the presentation part of the workshop. And because, we all know the effect of stray noise on Zoom. And also, I guess I would ask that it would be helpful if you also did not show your video during the presentation, because then the grid of pictures of people could be focused on the panel. And then after the presentations, the panel will open up to open discussion, and we can continue the open discussion as long as it's interesting to talk to each other. And all subjects related to the workshop and what Dan and Don have just mentioned are open for questions. So with those comments, I will turn things over to Robin Stein, and she'll get started and introduce the panel.
So thanks very much to the Ivan group for asking me to participate in this. The topic, I think, is quite important for all of us. We're trying to do our best to make sure that our precious spectrometers don't get contaminated or contaminate other people. I suppose it's not the spectrometers that get sick, but it certainly could be the user. And we've got a great framework for this in the automation tools that have been developed over a long period of time in both Topspin and VnmrJ, which have had various advantages that we've used, including making our own lives as easy as possible. So in order to implement some of the current concerns that we have, such as knowing who's in the lab at the right time, or really limiting the access of the students to the lab, then we are trying to see what we can do best with the software tools that we have in order to continue the research while minimizing the risk of contamination. And so the basic approaches that we're going to be talking about today is from the VnmrJ side. We're going to talk about using the CSV to CPQ macro, which Ken Knott of Virginia Tech is going to present on. Ken, do you just want to say hi or pop up on the screen? I actually think as people...
Hello, I'm here.
There we go, there's Ken. I'll talk a little bit about how I'm using CSV files with ICON-NMR. Hilary Jenkins, assisted I think with Bob Berno at McMaster University, will talk about the web interface to ICON-NMR. Do one of you just want to say hello so you pop up and we can see you?
Hi everybody, nice to see you.
Thanks, Hilary. Hey, Bob. And we've got, in addition, Darcy Burns, who is here as a VnmrJ specialist, although he has quite a bit of experience with Topspin as well. Darcy, say hello. Darcy will be around, I'm sure, as this happens. Peter Geerth, head application scientist of Bruker UK, available to answer any and all questions coming his way.
Hi.
Peter, just want to pop up. Hey, Peter. And then Dan Iverson, of course, whom you've already heard from Open VnmrJ Solutions, to talk about and to talk about anything more related to VnmrJ. I wanted to mention as well Peter van der Meulen from the University of Groningen, who posted recently to the Amaral list about an interface that he's developed in which a web server hosts information about experiments that users want to submit. So the user then doesn't need to be at the computer nor use a CSV file. The web server stores the information about the experiments, and then the spectrometer can be told to look for that information. So this gives a different interface that the students can use without having to be at the spectrometer. It's under development. You can see some nice pictures at his website, and we're hoping to discuss this more at a future IVEN meeting. So with that now, I'd like to turn over to Ken, who's going to talk to us a bit about his setup using CSV files with VnmrJ. Ken?
All right, hopefully everybody can see my PowerPoint. My name is Ken Knott, that's my married name. And I work at Virginia Tech, and I'm going to talk about my method of doing remote submissions using CSV2CPQ and Google Spreadsheets. Okay, so the objectives that the reason we all went through this is basically the same kind of things that Robin just talked about. We want to keep students out of our lab. About 95% of our samples came through our 2 robotic experience systems, and that is a terrific place to catch COVID, I think. So we want to avoid doing that. And the way I developed this method was to really keep it simple in the sort of the absolute opposite of what Robin had just mentioned from that development you just saw, which requires a lot of technical know-how to implement. This anybody can do, I think. Okay, I also wanted to change as little as possible from the way we were running things and create as little extra work for me as possible. And, you know, hopefully with a nice method, I'll receive a lot of applause and notoriety across the NMR field. Actually, I almost did today by forgetting about this meeting because I managed to set up solid state NMR training right before it, which is a bad idea. So what's my workflow? How is this going to work here at Virginia Tech? So students all have access to a shared Google spreadsheet. So we have Google Drive accounts here at Virginia Tech, and I simply create this spreadsheet and share it with all the students. They can all pop onto this spreadsheet and submit their samples to the spreadsheet, at which time they then bring their samples down to the NMR facility. We have this very fancy rack outside of our lab where they're going to load their samples into the same location to correspond with the spreadsheet that they just filled out. Then I'm going to take those samples and I can alternatively load it onto our 96 sample robot system or our 12-pack carousel system. This gives me a little flexibility depending on the load that's on one or the other. And then I submit those samples using the CSV2CPQ macro at the instruments. And then we return the samples by research group in these VnmR, these jars we purchased from various convenience stores. Okay, so now I'm going to just kind of demonstrate this really quickly. I'm going to change screens if I can. All right, and show you the spreadsheet. Okay, so this is the Google Drive spreadsheet as it is at this moment. And you can see that I have a number of columns that correspond to basic data you need to submit this. So the sample location corresponds to the location in the tray that I've loaded the sample. The date column is the experiment column. CSV2CPQ is set up for sort of day and night experiments. The way we have it set up on our spectrometers is that overflow from the day queue automatically goes into the night queue, so we just use one column. We have an operator column that allows me to do billing based on research group. A solvent column, obviously, sample name. Notebook I use as initials of the students so that I can track them down if there's an issue. And then, of course, the email address. And really, appropriately, because of this panel that I've been working with, I was able to implement a lot of new features to this that were problems in the past. You know, so as a shared spreadsheet with everyone able to access this, you can imagine that there are some errors that happen, and people would occasionally delete other people's data or delete the entire spreadsheet completely. So I was able to protect the cells to prevent that. I was able to implement drop-down lists. So this corrected issues with people putting the solvent names incorrectly or forgetting what their operator ID is. And then also you can even put the experiments that I've created into this drop-down list. So this experiment list has a little bit of a macro behind it because it allows me to put multiple experiments into the same column. There's a slight delay there, but I can load as many different experiments as I want. Because way CSV2 CPQ, each experiment needs to be separated by a single space for the delimiter. So it's really pretty easy to use, and the students enjoy it. I think they all look forward to submitting samples on it. So once that's done, I load those samples onto the instrument, and I sit down at the instrument. I'll download the spreadsheet right here into this instrument, and then all I have to do is I use the script repeatedly throughout the day. So I just up arrow, and there it is, CSV2 CPQ with the location of the file, and then I hit enter, and that will submit those samples to the instrument. So that's my system. Let's see if I can get back here to, and there we go. So there's a lot of advantages to the system. It's available 24 hours to the students. We don't run samples all day long, but they're able to bring their samples down to the lab at any point in time and submit them to the spreadsheet. It's flexible in the sense that I can upload that spreadsheet to whichever instrument I like. And there's really a pretty small load on me as far as customizing their experiments for them. Most of that involves if somebody wants some specific tweak to the proton or the carbon or whatever, I'll just create a new experiment and add that to the drop-down list. The disadvantages have largely been mitigated by those drop-down lists and just protecting cells. Basic spreadsheet technology was the biggest issue. That was human error. And sometimes the column headers can be a little bit unclear. Again, that's largely mitigated with those drop-down lists. Sometimes there's issues with timing of drop-offs. People might fill out their spreadsheet in another department, and it might take an hour for them to get their samples over here, but that's not really too much of an issue. And then I can't do it, the students at least can't do a lot of customization to the experiments, and we work around that by allowing them to remotely access the instrument on an as-needed basis through something like a VNC port. But 99% of the samples go through the spreadsheet. So that is what I have implemented here at Virginia Tech. It's really easy to implement probably anywhere. So if you have any questions, we'll start with some panel questions.
Excellent. I might actually start with the chat. There's a few questions in the chat. Dave Rice wanted to know if you started this in response to COVID.
Yes, before it was a walk-up system. Everybody just kind of came in and submitted their samples, probably like we all did. This was definitely as a response to COVID to keep people out of the lab.
Fantastic. Charlie Fry wanted to know if you could give a bit more detail or information as to how you protect cells and rows on the Google Sheet.
Sure. Get back over to it here. All you need to do is basically select the range you want, right click, and go to protect range. And then that row is now protected. You can set some permissions. Like for example, I'm only going to allow myself to edit those, and then done. And that row, now the column headers have been protected. I also protect the sample location numbers. As far as the drop-down lists, the way that works is a data validation tool. So you would select again the range you want to have the drop-down list, right-click, And this is all Google Sheets functionality, but the same thing is available in Excel. In the data validation tool, you can either enter all of the solvents, as I've done here, into a list of items, and then that will become a drop-down list. Or in the case of the experiments, I have an experiment list page where I have all my experiments listed. And now right-clicking that location, going to the data validation tool, it says list from a range, and then and it points to where that range is on the spreadsheet. Okay, so you can do it either way. I did it this way after I learned that you could do it this way, and I typed them all in manually when I was just figuring out how to do all this stuff.
Okay, I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. Anything that we don't get to in the chat here, we'll just push to the end after all the presentations so that we can answer absolutely everything for sure. So I think we could ask, how do you handle people populating the spreadsheet and then not dropping the samples off, or perhaps putting them in the wrong slot?
So sometimes there's a delay, as I mentioned, of people bringing them down, in which case I will just be patient. But usually people do bring them eventually. Now, sometimes they may remove them for some reason, and they're usually pretty conscientious about clearing those cells and making them available. As far as putting them in the wrong locations, that's the #1 potential area of a flaw here. No one here labels their tubes in a readable format. So I depend on them 100% to actually put them in the right locations. That's literally the only way I can identify. And you can see there's a student right now as we speak filling out the spreadsheet live and in person. This is very exciting. Wasn't expecting this kind of demonstration. Yeah, so it takes a lot of training. Before the drop-down lists, I would give 2 or 3 5-minute little trainings via Zoom almost every week until people kind of got the hang of it. But I haven't really had to do any training since I made this guy's life difficult by leaving a half-filled cell in there. If someone had done this here, I would have to track them down and correct this kind of behavior. But any other questions?
There are a few more. I don't know if you want to move to the next presentation or maybe answer one more and then we'll move to the next presentation. Everything else we'll either get to in the chat or defer to the end. So don't worry if you didn't get your question attended to. I'll just pick one off randomly. Actually, this is a fair one. Would you be willing to share the spreadsheet?
Sure. Yep. No
Okay,
problem.
that's an easy one. I'll ask one more easy one. Bob wanted to know if you can do this by phone.
Yeah, you can access this spreadsheet, whatever device you've got that can access your Google Drive account, and that's got Google Spreadsheet functionality. So it definitely works on most phones these days.
Fantastic. We'll push the others to the end. I think we're going to move on with the presentations at this point. So I'll push it to the next presenter from here.
Thanks very much, Ken. That was really interesting. And thanks, Darcy. Hand over. So I'm going to talk about a very, very similar concept. ICON-NMR can also read in CSV files, as with CSV to CPQ. They've got to be formatted properly. The twist that I've got is that rather than use Google Sheets, I'm using a web form. So I'm just going to give a bit of a demo for that. So just to set the stage a little bit, why we're doing this, the students don't have full access to the building anymore. External students, non-chemistry students in particular, can only go as far as the loading dock. Now, when I'm in the building, I'm the only one who touches the sample changer. So we've got samples coming to the sample changer from a few different locations. And in order to simplify my life so that I don't have to type in each person's sample name, the CSV file is useful And then the web form is a useful interface for the students to submit that information. So the demo that I'm going to give, I'm going to first show it to you as a student does it. So as if I, the student, wanted to submit a sample. I'll show you then what I, as the manager, do when I receive the sample, how I give the information to ICON-NMR. And I'll mention a little bit in passing some of the configuration that needs to be done. These slides will be made available either on the Ivan website or on the new Spin site Slack, or perhaps both. So you can watch those spaces for access to them. Sorry, okay, so I'm sitting right now in my office, as you can see from my video. I'm using my office computer. I'm going to now start a program called Remote Utilities, which allows me to connect to another Windows computer and view its desktop. So specifically, I'm going to connect right now to my spectrometer. So earlier today, what I did was I took the sample that I want to run, I put it into position 34. And I've just realized that I've completely forgotten the first part of this demo. I'm going to go away from my spectrometer. I'm now the student sitting on my desk in my office. And I've got my sample. I need to tell the manager what exactly it is that I want to have happen. So I go to the web form, I log in, and I fill in the requested information. So I'm going to say what the sample name is. I'm going to select my research group, choose the solvent, choose the experiment. Let's do a cozy for today. And if I want, I can specify additional information such as, and if I had a second sample, I would repeat that a second time. All right, so I've created my sample, I've given the information. I now am going to put my sample in the drop-off location. Now we're coming back to me as the manager, and it's at this point that I, as the manager, go to my spectrometer. I walk by the sample submission area. I see that there's a sample. I put it into position 34. At the spectrometer, I log in with a certain user that I've created for this purpose. I go to the internet, I go to the same web form page, but now I go to the results section. And by choosing the correct options from what's available in my web form, I can download this submission for this one sample. Glance over it, see that it makes sense. Have this little note that I need extra scans. As part of the importation, I actually removed the top 2 lines, so I'm going to resave it to make sure that it's okay. In ICON-NMR, I'm going to import it. This is the latest file that I've created. I spent some time already making sure that ICON-NMR is looking for the correct information in the web form, in the CSV file, excuse me. And the main thing that I've got to specify is that my first sample is in 34. This is something that only the manager knows in my setup. So I, as manager, take the samples from a couple different places, put them in the sample holder wherever is convenient, and then tell ICON-NMR that at this stage. I load it up. I go to 34, and lo and behold, it's all running. Now, if I had wanted to customize it, it would have been important to pause the run so that nothing started immediately. Then I could use the standard tools to customize. And we do run into the one clear error, which Ken mentioned, which is that in between walking from the sample changer to my office, I've already forgotten what the position number was. But the point stands that when I remember what I'm doing, I'm able to get information from the CSV file from the web form and import it into ICON-NMR. So that's the sort of setup that I've got here. And if there's any questions that you guys have, then I'm happy to take them. Okay.
So Robin, this is Bob Berno from McMaster. So they use a web form to submit the experiments, and then they place their samples somewhere. You retrieve the sample. Now, how do you know which sample goes with which web form?
So there's a couple parts to that. The sample is labeled at the top. Normally when I pick up the samples, I only get a few at a time, so I'm able to look at them. I also maintain separate web forms for the chemistry department users who leave their samples in one location, and the ones who are not in the chemistry department and use another location.
Okay. David Rice is asking, where does the web form come from? Did you make it yourself? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks. McGill websites are based on Drupal, which is an available platform for websites. And there's a module included in it from McGill, well, which McGill takes advantage of, which permits web forms to be implemented very easily. So because we were already having McGill host our website, we were able to use their module. But modules exist, for example, with WordPress already, and I believe that there might also be sites online which allow you to host web forms and download the results as CSV files.
And the students, they log in with their McGill University credentials then, and so it's secure in that sense?
They log in with their university's credentials, and yes, it's a requirement of McGill that if you collect email addresses, you've got to be logged in. So they only need to type their email address once, in fact, and then for each sample which they submit, their name and email address are saved with it because they're logged in, that information is known. And those can be saved as originator items, okay, so that the sample can be emailed to the correct person, or the data can be.
So one more question that just came up. How many samples a day are you typically having to run and using this method?
The non-chemistry users are probably submitting, it varies. They submit between perhaps 7 or 8 on average, and sometimes 20, because there's one group that does batches. The chemistry department users, it depends when I'm in. They only have to use the system when I'm in. They hate it. And so they'll put off actually using it until I leave. I don't know why they hate it. I don't think it's very difficult. The web form asks for the solvent and the experiment name, which I don't think is more taxing than entering that information into ICON-NMR. But it's different from what they're used to, and they don't like that.
Okay. I think for the purpose of time, we should maybe move on. So shall we move on to the next?
Okay, well, that would be you and Hilary, in fact, for the presentation of the web interface to ICON-NMR. So I'll let you.
Okay, so while Hilary's getting the presentation ready, I'll just take a moment to thank once again John and Dawn from MR Resources and Q1 for sponsoring this. I think it's really important to continue to meet with each other, especially given our current situation. So I'm really glad that this is going on, and I thank you once again for offering that and supporting it.
Thanks, Bob. Hi, everybody. Thanks, Robin and Ken, for your presentations. I'm going to switch languages and talk about Bruker's and Icon Web, ICON-NMR, and those are running under Topspin. So just to introduce how McMaster functions, we're a core facility. We're running everything under Bruker. We've recently done a pretty massive upgrade. McMaster helped us out and gave us $4.2 million. We updated many of our older consoles, a series of new cryoprobes, and bought one new system. I'm only going to talk about our automation systems today. They're running Topspin 4.07 on CentOS 7, so they're all Linux. The three major automation systems are 700 that's over in a different building for health science, And then a 600 to 500 that are here in the chemistry building. We're waiting on a 400 nanobay that with a sample express that's going to go into health science as well. We've got well over 100 users, probably in some cases almost 200, from 3 different faculties, 8 spectrometers in 2 different buildings. And so we can't manage to submit samples for everybody. What we've done then is implement a protocol where specific people from each research group are allowed to come into the facility, and they put the samples onto the autosampler, then they submit their experiments remotely through ICON-Web. They can do this. ICON-Web works from their laptops, their tablets, their phones, their desktops, whatever device they need to use. The staff do run the special experiments because there's no training in phase 1 of return to research. So if you're going to set up ICON-Web, and my apologies for people who've done this and are well versed in ICON-NMR and ICON-Web, but I'll go through a few details here. So when we are setting up ICON-Web, you're going to go through the configuration menu, and that in your ICON-NMR, and basically it'll ask you for your NMR administrator password. Once you have that, then you can open up your configuration menu. We're just looking here at what's called the web interface. That's what's in this long list of things. So down at the bottom, it's the web interface. And I'm going to talk first about enabling just the standard web server. So the 8015, which is unsecure or unencrypted web server. No matter what you're doing, whether you're going through the encrypted or unencrypted setup, you need to enable the web interface, otherwise nobody will be able to submit experiments, and that won't work for anybody. So do make sure that you enable the web interface. Below this, you'll see in this list, there's a whole list of people, and if we look at with slightly more detail, I would never allow all ICON users without checking passwords, so I don't do it that way. I just add users and I put their passwords in. We know them because we made them. And the users don't change their passwords. So they have their ID. So if I click the plus button here, what will happen is I'll get a little drop-down menu at the bottom of my list. I pick the user from the list. So this is from making that list in ICON-NMR. And then I would input their password. Once that's done, poof, they have access to ICON-Web, and they can start submitting their experiments that way. So one thing that's important, or a couple things that are important about setting things up for ICON-Web, you do need to give your users account priority status. So within, this is now looking at the user manager page. Within ICON-NMR, you don't normally give people priority unless they've got samples that have to get submitted immediately because they're unstable or that kind of thing. So we don't normally give people that kind of permission. However, with everyone using ICON-Web, we've had to do it, and the reason for that is that without giving them priority in ICON-Web, they can't change the file name, and they have to go with my default dropdown, which they apparently don't like very much. And they can't change their long experiments to nighttime. So Jeff here, his experiments are all daytime, and most people's are. What we did was we basically told everyone that if your experiment's longer than half an hour, you should set it to nighttime. In ICON-NMR, that's not a problem, but in ICON-Web, they can't do that unless we give them this priority status. So that's just a matter of in the permissions, giving them, making sure that they have this priority. I also wanted to point out that while I'm here, that in the user-specific parameters and commands, so when we're looking at experiment parameters that the users are allowed to adjust, of course, number of scans. All I want to point out, though, is in Bruker, without making sure that O1P, O2P are before SW1 and SW2 in the list of parameters, in ICON-Web, you can't change those. It will just bounce back at you and not let you change either of those parameters. So if you're setting up a 2D experiment, especially where you need to adjust the spectral window either on the, maybe on a COSY on both dimensions, it won't allow you to do it. So this is a little glitch, and Peter told me that, Peter Gareth told me that the workaround and the solution to that is to just change the order of the parameters. Okay, so now if I want to log into ICON-Web, what has happened here is I've typed in my computer name, :8015. So 8015, like I said, is our unsecure or unencrypted access. So our computer name is Nosy. The full path name shows up here. The users, so I've already typed that in and I've come to the ICON-Web window. The users need to be on the McMaster network. They either need to specifically be on campus, or they can access the McMaster network using their McMaster credentials via the VPN. So when you go to 8015, it's going to remind you, by the way, that you're using an unsecure connection. Yes, that is true. You type in your ID and then tab down to the password, type that in, and you're into ICON-Web. So this is back from the end of May, this screenshot. And so it was a lot less busy than it is now. Right now, pretty much all the holders are always busy. But anyway, like I said, I grabbed this a little bit earlier. You can see there's your instrument name. And then down below, those are the experiments that already run. If I want to add an experiment, I would click on the Add button. Oh, and by the way, version 5.17 of ICON-Web, for those of you who are curious. So I'm going to add an experiment. I'm not showing the top part of this window. At the top part, it's just the file, the title of the experiment. So that's the stuff that shows up in the upper corner. But like I said, giving priority lets people change the name of the file. Please keep in mind when you're letting people do this that they can't have wonky file names. So no spaces, no weird characters. It's an underscore and a dash only, and alphanumeric otherwise. I remind them that all the time. I've been doing this over and over again. It just flows out of my face every time I look at any kind of changing a file name. The other thing is, though, that priority and then nighttime status has shown up at the bottom. So if I submit or add my experiment and I see that it's going to be, an hour and a half, then I would come back and make sure that make sure that it's nighttime. So I just click on the little nighttime box. Yeah, so once I submit or add experiment here, what would happen is you don't exit this part of the ICON-Web experiment submission until you close the window. So once I add the experiment, then the experiment number will automatically increment, and then the user can add another experiment if they want. So they would select from the drop-down menu and add another experiment from the list, or else they would just close the window. Okay, so what will happen is if I change some parameters and then I add the experiment, when I do that, this number will change to 11, and then those parameters would revert back to the defaults. And so it looks a little bit wonky, but actually it's completely fine. What has happened is the experiment number is incremented, and and it's waiting for you to add another one. So if I just close the window, then I would go back to, I would end up back at this window where my experiment would show up with the holder, and then I would click on that holder number, click submit, poof, experiment is submitted. So as far as the challenges we've seen with ICON-Web, one thing that's kind of important, and I think that this is getting fixed as we speak, ICON-Web corrupts the setup file for ICON-NMR. So what we've seen is that since we've been using ICON-Web, and we've been using it sort of since COVID, we've used it before, but we've been really using it heavily since COVID. And what we've seen with version 4.07 of Topspin is that ICON-Web has been corrupting that setup file. So if you're in your system and you exit ICON-NMR for some reason, reloading that same setup file doesn't work. And you can't reestablish that same run. Like I said, we didn't see this with the earlier versions of Topspin, but there is a patch for that, and all you need to do is ask for it. Older versions of ICON-Web, and this is from Topspin 2.1 and 3.x, holders can become corrupted because the users don't log off properly. And in our little window, so when you're in ICON-Web, after you've submitted the experiments, it's really important to make sure that the users log off. rather than just close or exit the window. Otherwise, certain holders can become corrupted and then they're unusable for everybody. And finally, like I pointed out, our user experiment parameters need to be in a particular order. We let our users adjust several parameters to suit their needs, and we don't create a whole bunch of new experiments for every situation. So the other way you can set up ICON-Web is through your SSL or through your encrypted server. In this case, though, you need to generate a certificate of some kind to give it that secure status. And one super duper advantage of 8016 is that it will let you enable all users with a little click, and then you do not have to add everybody individually. So again, here, now I'm picking 8016, and I'm going to allow all of those users. I don't have to do a whole bunch of, I don't have to spend hours trying to put in everybody's password correctly, etc. Challenges here, though, when you're looking at view certificate, it actually doesn't let you view certificate because I can't remember exactly what the argument is, but it says it just won't let you view that anymore. You can make one, but when you make it, it doesn't work with every web browser. And so we tried SSL or 8016 for about half a day before I said, no, I can't deal with this, and went back to 8015 because it randomly failed. And it was different for everybody. So some people couldn't get into it at all. Some it failed on Firefox, not Chrome, and back and forth Chrome and not Firefox, Safari and not anything. So we're not sure exactly why that failed, but we're working with our IT, which for us is research and high performance computing, to generate our own certificates. And we'll do that for all of our systems. The only issue with those is that they do expire and they have to be regenerated, but because we would have it already implemented with our HPCS, we won't have to worry about that. In essence, right now, we found that it's just easier to live with that sort of unsecure connection, but of course, our HPCS doesn't like if we do that. Finally, I'm just going to point out we have a few exceptions to remote access. So some of our users who need to do kinetics experiments and in automation, and they want to, basically they're submitting their experiments through ICON-NMR, but they can time all of those experiments to run at specific times during the day. So those people have to submit their experiments at the workstation because ICON-Web has no provision for them to submit their experiments at specific times. This is also true, so they can, if they're working in ICON-NMR for Topspin 3.2 and higher, they can also time their experiments. But if you're still back in 2.1 with like AV systems, then you can't time your experiments. So that was just implemented here by the time you were working through Topspin 3.2. We've got a few groups that work in hands-on mode, so we've had to have people do, like people who are finishing up their thesis or people who are just finishing off a really critical paper. They've had to do their variable temperature NMR or very specific kinetics experiments hands-on. We've been, and then I go in and I make sure I wipe everything down after that happens. All solids NMR, obviously, and our protein people are working sort of hands-on. What they're doing is submitting their samples and then working remotely to the computer. So they come in and put the samples on, and then they go away and they're working remotely. As far as safety, I mean, there's a ton of safety. We have people who, everything is key card access to all of our rooms, but then we also have people check in through a little Microsoft form that goes to Bob, so he knows that people have come into the facility, and then they do it again when they exit the facility. And the reason for this is because there's so few people in the basement where our magnets are. We wouldn't know if there was an accident or something, if somebody fell or someone hurt themselves. So we've got people who check in and check out, plus the key card access, so we know who's going in and out of the rooms. If they're working at the glove stations, or at the workstations, they have to wear gloves. And McMaster has just mandated masks inside for all public areas. In all, I need to say that, and using the words of Dr. Bonnie Henry, who's the medical officer for British Columbia, all of our users have been kind, calm, and safe. They've really embraced the remote access through ICON-Web. I think actually they like having someone to, Sherpa their samples down for them and pick them up again. ICON-Web's worked really well. We've had, quite frankly, very few issues, and any that we have been answered right away. And our users have been moving forward with their research. I'm really, really super proud of how people have embraced the changes that we've imposed on them. And with exceptions, of course, there are always exceptions. Everybody's been really compliant. So I'd like to thank everybody, and this is coming from both Bob and I. And you know, if there are questions, then I'd be happy to answer them.
Thanks very, very much, Hilary. That really was interesting and a nice way to use a tool which is basically already there. You've got to learn to use it, of course, but it's maybe a bit less set up than some of these things, which is very good. Now, we've had a couple of questions. How do the samples actually get to the sample changer in your setup?
Well, the students come down to the facility. They so they come to the door. They're bringing them. So
okay.
What we decided to do was that for each research group, they're allowed one person per shift who's allowed to bring the samples down, and they literally put the samples onto the sample changer themselves. So when they walk into the lab, they immediately have to wash their hands. They all do it without exception because everybody's used to washing their hands. And then our lab's quite large, so there's basically, when they come through the door, there's a waiting area, then there's the area for the 600, the area for the 500. They come in, they wash their hands, and then the stuff for the 600 is right there. They can put gloves on. They're not mandated to, but a lot of them do put gloves on, put the samples onto the auto sampler, and then they walk through the room. And at the other end of the room, they remove their gloves, and there's hand sanitizer there as well.
You're really limiting the time that the users are in the room, and you don't have a shared computer.
That's right, yeah.
That's really helpful. A couple of specific questions. Can you copy experiments? Can you copy a setup? So for one sample, you want to do proton and cozy, and for the next 10, you also want to do proton and cozy. Can you just copy it, or do you do each holder separately?
Yeah, so I didn't show a screenshot of ICON-NMR, but yeah, within ICON-NMR down, so below where all of the experiments are, there are several buttons. One of them is submit, edit, delete, cancel, add, and copy. So if you've got one sample and then it's rare that we have 10 more, but if that happens, then let's say 10. So I've got, my first sample where I put my experiment parameters. But whether you can copy it in ICON-Web. Yeah, you can, because the buttons are still there, for sure. The buttons are still there. Oh, they're not? Oh,
no, not in the web interface. Only on ICON-NMR at the workstation. So.
Oh, okay. So, okay, you're right. I'm thinking of ICON-NMR. So no, I think ICON-Web doesn't do that. So ICON-Web hasn't, its last update was probably 2017. So I don't think that a lot of it has changed recently, where ICON-NMR has changed more. So no, if they've got 10 samples, then they're going to have to submit all of the parameters for each one.
Doesn't take so long either.
Yeah, it's not a big deal. We don't have too many people doing column work right now.
Just a moment, those. So if you two as managers, if you're away and you want to see how things are doing, would you just go into ICON-Web and see how things are doing, or do you have a different way to do that?
No, we VNC directly in. So ICON-Web is too limiting for me. I want to see everything, and I want to, actually be able to write on it and send a note to whoever, if there's someone at the workstation, and tell them to get their hands off of it. We haven't had that happen. But I want to log in directly, and I want to be able to make changes or stop the queue if there's a reason to. We have some trouble with certain samples, so when people are using J Young tubes and they get stuck in the sample case plus, we have to stop the queue and restart it.
Yeah.
And so, and I'll just follow up on that. That was actually one of the questions in the chat, was asking about, can you use X11 VNC? And in fact, we have been doing that, exactly that, for many years. And Hilary alluded to the protein people who come in, insert their sample, and then go away and log in remotely. And that's, they're also using a VNC connection from, hypothetically, I guess they could go to the beach, and as long as they have good Wi-Fi. And then, tune and match and do their experiments remotely, and they don't have to sit at the workstation.
Yeah, same for the solids people as well. They're working remotely as well, but through VNC. So we've made them all understand very clearly that having VNC and having that privilege is definitely a privilege. And, so that, again, everybody's just grateful to be able to get some data. So we've had pretty good compliance.
Okay, there are one or two more questions. I'm sure Bob's already monitoring the chat, and you can go in, Hilary, as well. We can open it up. Sorry, I've just seen Laird's last question. Who's going on vacation next week of all of us? All right, we'll leave that one in the chat, I suppose. But yeah, so opening up the floor then, if anyone has questions for any of us or other thoughts about this, or we can go on and talk about the remote access via VNC and so on. I think, as Dave Rice has just said, we'll need a full meeting just to go into different ways that people are seeing their spectrometers, everything about the spectrometer remotely. So I don't think that's a huge topic for today, but well, I've got a question then for the other panelists. We've talked about, we've sort of touched on this, I suppose. Are there any advantages to using the CSV file? I don't think ICON-Web is relevant, but the CSV file, are there any advantages to that, Ken, if you haven't got a sample changer? What are you doing with your instruments which don't have sample changers, I guess is my question. For any of you guys, in fact. Ken, you need to,
Sure, I might be able to take a stab at that. Our facility has 10 spectrometers, and it's a mix of auto samplers and non-auto samplers. Maybe we're perhaps in a privileged position in that we have 5 auto samplers. So for routine experiments, and for routine, I mean sort of a variety of 1D tunable and 2D organic sweet, and in some cases kind of inorganic 2D. That gets passed through to the CSV to CPQ. So that leaves the other spectrometers. We are doing staff service requests on those times. So we're trying to limit the number of staff on site at any given time. Should we have an outbreak, at least 1 or maybe 2 staff members are at home. So the on-site person would load the staff sample into the spectrometer without an auto sampler, and then remotely the staff member at home takes over the acquisition if they need, and then we share desktops if we want with our clients, and that sort of thing, so that we can interact with them and try and fulfill the training and teaching aspect of our mandate a little bit. So we're a little lucky there, but we're also stretched thin when we do things this way, because one person's job on site is to manage samples and take care of fills when they're there and that sort of thing. So it's almost like we're down a person just doing that kind of stuff. So that's how we work. I might defer to Ken or others for their comments.
Yeah, we're a little similar to that, where the CSV2 CPQ back row is really most useful for an automated system with a robot. So our other instruments, we have 3 other instruments that we're still kind of having, they're on a reservation only basis, 1 student at a time. They can sit down and they can access it. We've got some procedures in place to protect them at the instrument and protect people after them. But it really is just kind of a 1 in, 1 out, clean up after yourself, wipe down the surface policy, so that those are the cases where the one thing that CSV2 CPQ doesn't do well is, like somebody asked about kinetic experiments or a 1D nosy that requires some customization. You can do it, in CSV2 CPQ, but not with the kind of work, not with the throughput that we're trying to maintain. So we ask students to do those kind of things on our other instruments that are reservation only. And it's actually worked really well. I've had to disperse students occasionally, but like Hilary was saying, people are buying into it, protecting themselves and protecting me, most importantly. That's what's vital.
Yes, that's a good point. Are you all going to keep these setups when this is all done? You're going to keep an option for people to just drop off samples and use a CSV or connect via Icon Web? You know, you've run your proton during the day, you want to see if the carbon's worth doing, decide later. Is that stuff you're going to keep up?
Yeah, we've been using Icon Web for a long time, and since the upgrade, a lot of people were asking when we were going to re-implement it. Mostly, like I said, our magnets are in the basement. People on the 4th floor don't want to come down. They want to submit their experiments, and you know, you're right. Take a look. Is it good? Great. I'm going to add a bunch more. And they really loved Icon Web when we had it before, and they're loving it now. And like I said, they don't care who brings their samples down to the basement. I think that part will go away eventually. But since physical distancing isn't going anywhere for the foreseeable future, you know, it'll probably just work better for us to maintain the system we have for the foreseeable future, which could be well into next year.
Yeah, I think as well, I mean, as a system for service, it works nicely. And the one advantage I can see, even for samples that won't be run on a sample changer, is I won't make any typos with the email address or the sample name. I've got it all there to copy and paste, if nothing else. But until we start letting more people into the building, which I don't know when that will happen.
I don't think we're not in any hurry to move back. We're in no position to do it yet, but I definitely can see an advantage to the CSV file with our undergraduate labs, which used to be I'd receive a handwritten sheet and have to type all that in. And boy, I thought grad student handwriting was bad. So this will be really, really useful for that. So it's nice to see that these little implementations do have an opportunity to carry forward into our non-COVID lives, I think.
Sorry, Darcy's just mentioned that there were a couple of questions that we overlooked. Darcy, do you want to sort of present those?
Yeah, sure. These are for you, Ken. There were a couple more that we didn't get a chance to get to earlier on. So I'll just cover them now. I think we kind of answered 2 of them in a roundabout way, but I'll come to them anyways. In the CSV to CPQ setup, are you able to coordinate solids, or do you prefer to coordinate solids? Similarly, what about kinetics and that sort of thing? Do you have to arrange experiments according to certain timings?
Well, our solids instruments are definitely not automated, so no. And I don't know how you would run solids automated there, at least with the samples that I get. As far as things like kinetics and 1D nosies and things like that, what I will typically ask people to do is to submit that sample into the rack with like a proton, and then I'll tell them where it is after that proton's completed and give them temporary remote access through, and we use something called anydesk.com, and that allows them to go in there and run their little 1D nosy and then get back out. Kinetics is something that takes more time, so we ask people to reserve times on the reservation instruments to do that. There was a question, somebody asked me like how I managed the spreadsheet throughout the day, and I definitely didn't cover that. So I submit the samples as they come in, as I have time, as the spreadsheet fills up, and then I clear it. So I might have a dozen samples, I load them onto the instruments, and I will clear the spreadsheet. So I might do it, I might submit samples 10 times in a day, I might do it twice, it just kind of depends. But people have been really happy that there's not a big delay with this system. There was some concern among the faculties that people would be waiting on their data. And really, it's been really pretty efficient. So we're happy with the way that's worked.
Excellent. I think that covers most of the questions you had. There was one question that Krish, I think, covered in the chat regarding day queue and night queue and how you manage day queue and night queue. But if you wanted to add something else, and then that's everything that you had.
Yeah, I'll just say that there is a lot more capability with the CSV2 CPQ than we're using. I mean, you can really put any parameter you want in any column header. So if people were limiting it to one experiment per sample, you could put in every parameter in there and not have to kind of create all these custom experiments. The issue becomes if you submit multiple experiments, and let's say you change the delay to 10 seconds, every experiment will run with that 10-second delay. So just to keep it simple, we have kind of removed all that sort of available customization, but there's probably ways you could do kinetics or something like that with this macro. You just have to kind of plan around it.
The CSV to CPQ can take columns. A column can say night, another column can say day. And there's you can call it whatever you want. And then there's a synonym file that interprets that column header as it's a day queue or a night queue. So it's the same sample can be submitted for a day queue and a night queue, same entry, day queue and a night queue, and it will keep the night queue in hold until the night begins, and so on and so forth. So it's already a built-in feature in that.
You mentioned to me that there was a question that had come by.
Yeah, so there's one at least one Bruker question in the chat. So Steve Clements asked, can you use the max duration of a day experiment feature to kick any long experiments to the nighttime? And actually you can't, because it just doesn't allow you to submit the experiment as a day experiment. It won't automatically make it a night one. What you could do is work in reverse. So if you have a lot of your experiments set up to be night experiments, and you have the allow nighttime experiments to run during idle daytime feature active, then you can allow short experiments that would otherwise run during the night to allow to run during the day if there's nothing else in the queue. So for example, if you set up a limit of half an hour for day experiments, then you could set like a 1 hour carbon that would always run in the night because it's longer than 30 minutes. But if someone submits an HSQC that's 15 minutes but is a night experiment, if there's nothing else in the queue, then that HSQC would then be queued and run during the day. So there are a few options for that, but unfortunately the seemingly simple option of use the max duration of a day experiment doesn't quite function like that here.
Right.
By the way, the fact that you need to use the priority functionality to submit, to change between day and night is kind of a bug, so we should look at that.
Yeah, we didn't. That was a new bug, unfortunately. Yeah. And we didn't know that it existed until we started setting up this particular version. We did have a lot of what would be considered to be long experiments. Default when we used to have our previous setup, we made a lot of experiments nighttime, but we decided this time when we were building people's accounts that we would let them be accountable for changing their own experiments to night. And we've had, I would say, 99% compliance, and the other 1%, someone will squeal. So somebody comes and says, they left their experiment, it's 45 minutes. And so I told them that after 30 minutes, they should set it to night. And then there is that other provision, Peter, like you said, where any experiment that's say less, and I set it to less than an hour long, and it's set to night, it will run during the day if there's nothing else running. And so basically we get everything done. Any, short, less than an hour long experiments get run, during the day as much as possible. So actually the way it's set up works really well for us. So I know it sounds easier to make experiments automatically get kicked out, but I think relying on the users as well, actually, you know, you treat people like adults, they actually act like it. So that's what we tend to do.
Laird's just posted a very good point in the chat right now, which is that the upshot for Ken and myself, at least, and Darcy, and less for Hilary and Bob, because they've done it differently, is that we spend a lot of our time transferring samples from a rack to a spectrometer and downloading files from a web form or from a Google Sheets or whatever, a spreadsheet. And yeah, you know, my goal is to think as little as possible about the experiments, and that's sort of not the point. You know, that's why we have sample change, that the students can think as little as possible about the experiments. We're talking a bit at McGill about getting grad students to do some of this work, although there's limits as to what grad students can be paid to do. They can't be TAs, for example, at McGill, because the union does not define a TA as somebody who moves samples around for other grad students. And obviously we have no money because we've just had several months of not having much income, and now we're still down. So I don't know what will happen in the future. Do any of you have other thoughts about this?
So on our side, we've been lucky to be able to bring on one student and one recently graduated student who is familiar with our workflow. Their job is to move samples around the lab, and we've actually extended our sort of curbside service hours by doing this. So they come in the afternoon, and they'll run actually till 8 o'clock, moving samples from pickup trays to spectrometers, and from finished samples from spectrometers to a pickup location for students to pick up their completed samples. That's helped. In part, we've been able to do that because one faculty member has their own spectrometer. So by having one of their students actually brought it into our workflow, their off hours, they can actually do all the submissions for that particular lab onto that spectrometer. Or quite frankly, it's an open access for all the spectrometers for them personally. So that's a huge bonus for them as well. So it's a bit of a selling point when juxtaposed with kind of a crappy salary that we are forced to offer them. It's not a hard job, right? So we're being pushed to offer them only minimum wage. So on the other hand, they're students, so it buys a bit more ramen, I guess.
Anything helps, right? Yeah. I mean, we do also keep talking about this ramp up phase, right? That's the phrase we've used here, but it's not clear when the ramp stops, or whether there's, you know, nobody quite knows where we're heading towards. It's making it difficult to make any plans.
Yeah, here, given that you know, the discussion over classes is certainly not ramping up much as far as, you know, people being in the classroom. So we don't have any intention of changing our process through the fall. I don't think that the load, you know, I guess we're a moderate sized facility with moderate use. It hasn't been so much extra work that has kept me from being able to do what I do. I mean, what's really kind of becoming more challenging is creating offline training material for all the instruments, and that's a bunch of extra work that's a lot more time consuming than loading samples is. So
yeah, I mean, and that's a future meeting topic for sure, because at some point we can't just keep the last year's grad students doing everything. There will be new grad students joining, at least here, and they've got to actually get into it. It's part of what they're here for. So we need to think about how that's going to happen. But that's certainly a future topic. Okay, are there other thoughts or?
Yeah, anyone who's
Questions people have?
Yeah.
panelists or not, please.
Everyone should speak up at this point.
Yeah. Don't be shy.
I might add that the CSV to CPQ has allowed us to do training for new students. There are a couple of new students that are sort of stragglers. We haven't had as many, obviously, as we would normally at this time of year, but there's been one or two. So we're able to offer them training on curbside. So we don't give them access to anything else but the online forms, and basically we show them, like on Zoom, how to put a sample into a spinner and that sort of thing. It's maybe not ideal, but at least it gives them an opportunity to have an account, somewhere to put their data, and they can still acquire data, because all they have to know how to do is work with our safety SOP essentially and put a spinner safely into a turbine. So that workflow has really actually allowed us to keep up with the training partially, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, so then you have students at least taking responsibility, taking ownership, if you like, of their NMRs, which is certainly the first step, and giving them independence. It is particularly important when the students are doing shift work, for example. You know, if you're only in for a few hours, you need to get your NMR. Otherwise, you're wasting half of your shift and you might not be able to come in for another couple of days.
Has anyone out there had an issue with students perhaps not following the SOPs, or in particular if a staff member is not on site and you have SOPs that are related to safety, for instance, and they're caught out? How are we managing that as a group, I guess? I'd be curious to see what the response is out there, because it makes me a little nervous to know that this is happening. I will catch students well, occasionally I'll catch students.
We typically, this is Dean Olson at the University of Illinois. I guess I could turn on my video. We typically just take away NMR privileges, Darcy. And if you do it for 24 hours, students are in a tough position of explaining to their advisors why they don't have any NMR data for 24 hours. That usually takes care of the problem.
Do you have any pushback from the PIs on that, or are they behind you?
PIs. I do not begin by telling the PIs. I dump it on the students, and the problem typically goes away.
Thanks, Dean.
Darcy, on that topic, like, do you know if well, your university has a policy about things like that? Do you have something that you could follow?
That's a really good point. You'd almost hope for some top-down literature or top-down management. That's been fairly loose. There are rules from the department and that sort of thing, but in terms of enforcement, it's not even often I see the word mandatory, for sure, thrown around. So enforcement seems to be a bit of a Wild West. Options like Dean offers aren't bad. I expect I'll catch, in our university, we're not allowed to have students working between midnight and 7 in the morning. They feel that environmental health and safety, of course, there's not enough of them there to respond to any emergencies. Now, are there students there between midnight and 7? I bet my accounting tells you that there are. So I haven't run a recent batch of accounting, which is on me, but I will do shortly. And I think when I do see students who are there after midnight, I'll have to take some appropriate action there. But no, I don't have any top-down management for enforcement rules.
Our department, Darcy, has a very specific rule that if there's any violations of that type, that the student is then not just excluded from the NMR facility, but from the building. And the chair is very strong on that. So they would, I don't know if that's happened, but she's made it really clear that they won't be allowed in the building. We're still doing phased introductions of students into the building. So it's a pretty big deal here.
Sometimes management at the upper echelons of academia are reluctant to impose rules on a guy like you, Darcy, because they don't know exactly what you need. And they're just waiting for you to impose a rule, and if you do, they'll probably support you. So try it and see what happens.
That's a fair point, and I think it's certainly, I appreciate both of your comments and Bob's as well. It's definitely, I agree with you. I agree with you, and I'll be taking those options.
Yeah, I mean, there needs to be support from the department. And I mean, doing things wrong in the NMR lab is probably by somebody who's doing things wrong elsewhere.
Yeah, I might add that I was very happy to see the chair impose this rule. But in the past, we had a lot of success similar to Dean's. I would actually just threaten the students. I'd rarely take their privilege away. The threat was sufficient and would tend to clean them up. But I really meant the threat. It was kind of like, do this again.
Charlie, what we found here was that if you threaten people, they don't tell their friends.
Well,
take their privileges away. Everybody in the department knows that that person has lost their privileges for 24 hours. They can't hide it. So we just pulled the rug out from under people. It doesn't happen very often. I probably do it like probably 3 or 4 times a year in regard to one thing or the other.
Are there other questions coming in? And maybe it's time for us to begin to think about wrapping up. Robin?
I don't see anything new. Oh, no. Well, everyone logged on here be notified when there is a webinar on remote access. The messages will go out the same way as they have, right? Ivan and Amril.
Yes. Actually,
there's a third one.
Actually, that is one thing I was going to talk about, is that with seeing Ivan spin sites now for the first, well, in the last week for the first time, I can think one point to make about Ivan spin sites is that I can certainly see it being expanded well beyond Variant Agilent, and that it can easily be an Ivan forum. And so people should think about Ivan spin sites also as a place to get information about future meetings. Also, the other point that came up is that we are already talking about that remote training and remote access are certainly 2 other good topics for whole separate meetings. And so we should be thinking, we're going to be thinking about those 2 for our next operational meeting coming up in the, probably in a few weeks. It'll be probably one of those 2 topics. So if there are any volunteers to participate in the panel, certainly you should get in touch with us, and we may be coming out to tap you for the pleasure. Also, Krish, did you want to talk about upcoming possibilities in the research area?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Actually, we are also in a parallel effort. We are also coming up with topics that are technical in nature. Similar kind of a forum, roundtable workshop discussion, and that is coming down the pike. It will probably alternate between what this group is doing and what I am trying to get organized. Currently, we have three topics are already acted upon, and we have leaders for those that's being put together. One on metabolomics by Emmanuel Hetzakis in Ohio State, and another one on RDC and its application in structural isolation by Roberto Gill in Carnegie Mellon, and the third one is on heteronuclear J measurements by Thomas Williamson from University of North Carolina. I would prefer if you guys can send me emails on what you think could be a useful topic. Then we will go find an expert to lead the topic and put together a panelist for that. And this is a good forum to have discussion, not just presentation. So thank you.
Thanks, Krish. So those we'll be discussing getting dates for those workshops probably within the next week or so. So I think there are probably going to be a lot of Ivan meetings coming up over the next couple months, and we hope to keep it going. I'd like to thank all our panelists and everyone who's come to participate here. And I hope that we see you back for the next meeting. And we hope that this will just keep going. Let me give the floor to John if he has anything to say.
Well, thank you, Dave, and many thanks to our speakers and panelists today. Gee, we started the whole Ivan thing just about 4 years ago right now, and it's certainly come of age, I would say. As Dave says, we've got a number of meetings to be held consistently, trying to shoot for every 2 or 3 weeks or so, and I think we'll bring a number of very interesting and informative topics. Thank you to everyone for joining us today, and don't be shy. Stay with us. I think we'll have a lot of interesting stuff coming up.
Okay, well, thanks, John. And one thing I'll add here is we had some private discussion about where the material from this meeting would go, and we'll be discussing that. Probably a combination on Ivan Spin sites, though we have to be careful about file sizes for Ivan Spin sites, and the web page. So that will be a topic of discussion as well in the next week or so. So you should be able to see these presentations fairly soon, at least in a week or so. So are there any other comments? If there aren't, I'll conclude the meeting. Okay, well, if there are no other comments, then thank you, everyone, and we'll see you in a few weeks.